Hello, this is Michael. Welcome back to the Learning to Program using the Godot game engine. In this video, we're going to break down a part of the Hello World project, and we're going to look at Whitespace. So Godot is based on the Python programming language, and in Python, Whitespace is called, both languages are called a Whitespace significant language, and all that means is Whitespace is really important in Godot. So whitespace is empty spaces both between lines, but also at the beginning and end of your lines of code are also inside. So we're going to look at all those different situations and where it's important. Alright, so in other languages like C#, I'm going to set this to C#. A function, just like ready, might look like this. So this is a function that does much like what we did in Godot, but this is written in a different language called C#. So as you notice, it looks very similar, but I've got these little curly brackets and I've got these semicolons at the end of my line. So the semicolons at the end of the line indicate that that's the end of the line and it's ready to move on to the next line. And the curly brackets indicate that this is the start and stop of this block of code that belongs to this function. And this block inside is called the body of the function. Well, in C#, let's say I have another line of code here, and we'll use another statement that we're going to look at later called the if statement. And we'll say if 1 equals 1, need parentheses around that, if 1 equals 1, and then we'll start another set of brackets, and we'll have another console line here. Alright, so this is another valid program written in C#. So what I want to do here is I want to demonstrate that the whitespace is not as significant in C#. So this is a valid program, but this is also a valid program. Alright, because in C#, whitespace is not significant like it is in Godot. However, if you look at this, it's really difficult to read. And what the designers of the Python and Godot language likely realized was this was just a lot of wasted lines of code making all these brackets, because most good developers indent their code over anyways in order to make it more readable. And as you notice, this looks a lot more readable already, just like that. So what they did is they took the fact that programmers were moving their code over using tabs or spaces or whitespace, and they built it into the language. So this is how Godot identifies the start and stop of a function of a body of code. So in this case, this function, it needs a body of code after it, and it's indicate any kind of statement that needs or requires a body of code uses this colon at the end of the line. And so we'll look at a couple more statements in the future that use bodies of code, but in this case, this is all we have at the moment. So this function is looking for a body of code following it, and we can see that by the colon. So what I need to do is I need to make sure that each line of code that's in that body after the ready function is moved over by the same number of spaces. You don't specifically have to use the tab key, which is indicated by this little arrow with a line, and that helps you. It helps because it's a single character, so it's a little bit quicker to work with, but it also is adjustable by the developer. So some people just like 2 spaces, some people like 4 spaces, and that can be adjusted up here in the editor settings. Alright, so that's bodies white space. Let's make that if statement just like we did before. So if I make an if statement here, and I say if 1 equals 1, and then I end it with a colon, then I get a red line, and that's saying I expect a body of code to start here. So I need to indent my code over, which Godot automatically does. So when I was on this line, when I hit enter, it automatically started my line of code over 1 tab. So now I can say another statement like print true, just like I did in the C# program we looked at a minute ago. You notice as soon as I finished that line, this next line, the red went away, and that's because it knows that this is a body of code, and because that body of code, or because that white space ended, and I went back, I indented back, it knows that that body ended. Alright, so that's white space for indenting for bodies of code. Now, white space between lines of code. So you notice here, I have a line of code, or I have a space right there between my ready and my first code line. Now, the compiler does ignore these, and so you don't have to worry about white space between lines of code. As a matter of fact, I encourage it because it's usually very your brain automatically differentiates between groups of color and empty space, and so it's a good way to organize so that when your eyes look at code, they automatically group blocks of text. So I encourage you to use white space where it feels appropriate to help you organize your code. Alright, so another place we'll look at white space is inside statements. So just like in written language, like English, I wouldn't want to separate a word with a space because that makes 2 words, right? And the same thing is true in programming languages. You cannot separate words with spaces. So any kind of word is a keyword, like these statements, function and print and get node. Those are all, well, this is actually a function, and this is a statement. Pass is also a statement. Extends is a statement. So those cannot be separated by a white space. And also names cannot be separated by white space. So function names, or later we'll look at variables, and right here is an example of a property. All those cannot be separated by spaces. You can use underscores, just like right here. They separate these 2 words while keeping it all one name by using an underscore character. So that can help you make your code more readable while still obeying the rule of not having spaces in your names. Alright, and finally we'll look at white space where it does apply in lines. So there's a lot of subtle rules here, and we won't go into all of them, but in general, white space is allowed between, let's call it punctuation of lines of code. So I can put spaces there and that won't affect anything. I can put spaces here and it won't affect anything. Right there. You can have spaces at the end of your lines. All that's okay and will not affect your code in any way. It may make it a little bit less readable or more readable based on where you put it. So this is actually valid like that, but it's a little bit squished up, and so by adding a little white space right there, I actually make it a little bit more readable. But if you add too much, perhaps like this, Now it's a little bit hard to read just because my eyes have to jump over here to see what's going on. Alright, that's it for Whitespace. I hope that helped, and I'll see you in the next video.